Okay, good day to you all. Welcome to this second session of FMG on the recently concluded WTO 13th Ministerial Conference. Last time we did a kind of more general review of the results of MC13. And today, from today on, we are going to probably some specific issues, and we are going to start with dispute settlement. And you know what has happened and what is maybe coming hopefully by the end of the year. So without further ado, I will just immediately give floor to Alex, who has kindly agreed to moderate today's session. Alex, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou, and welcome to you all. Dispute settlement has been on the agenda for many, many years, at least the reform. It was not within the single undertaking package, but it was closely linked to the package nevertheless. And I remember as far back at least as 2001, there were attempts to review the dispute settlement understanding. And we have tried many different ways of, members and others in the past and present, we have tried many different ways to improve the dispute settlement understanding. But some time ago, Marco Molina, former Deputy Permanent Representative of Guatemala, whom I've known for many, many years, was asked to conduct some consultations, very informal. And by his account, he had more than 350 meetings, 110 plenaries, many bilaterals, to say nothing of all the quiet conversations over coffee and in the corridors with many different delegates and other stakeholders. And he produced a report. The report for the ministerial. Now, this is the 7th iteration of a report of possible understandings on reforms to the DSU. It has no square brackets, which tells you something about the process. And in all of this, Marco had no support from the Secretariat. It's not the Secretariat's fault, but it's the wish of one or a few other members who felt more comfortable to have this without assistance from the Secretariat, which I think is a bad mistake. Anyhow, the chair reported to the ministerial and one formal document, and he spoke of significant progress. And Marco and others have signaled that, as a matter of fact, they felt they were quite close to a conclusion. I don't know what exactly that means. So I spoke with Marco about 15 days ago, and I was very struck by what he told me. So he was therefore invited to share his views on this process. Which unfortunately he now is not in a position to continue to conduct. Big loss for the system. In his report, Marco speaks of a solution-oriented approach. He speaks of an interest-based approach. And if you want to know what that means, he has an example about a pumpkin, which is a very clever way of describing what it means. And a bottom-up approach. So all three combined, I think, has led to design a process which seems to be quite fruitful. And I would say that this is very good news because once more the system, perhaps by trial and error, is coming up with something which can work, not only for dispute settlement, but perhaps in other areas. So Marco, you may be now the pioneer of what the WTO should be doing in the future in all areas, or at least most of them, if results are wanted. In your report, of course, and not of course, but in your report, when it comes to the appellate body mechanism, the text is blank. But I suppose you will illustrate what exactly that means, etc. So the invitation is for you to, thank you for joining us, for you to share your views, explain the process, and also explain at least some of the substance where the main reforms, changes are suggested and what kind of consensus is behind those. And you have about 35, 40 minutes to do this. And then we are fortunate enough to have 3 commentators, our all-time favorite former appellate body member, Jennifer Hillman, together with Petros Mavroidis and Mr. Wenhua. So, Marco, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Firstly, I would like to express my gratitude to the Friends of Multilateralism Group for extending this opportunity to discuss the DS reform process today. It is truly an honor to be part of this event and engage in a dialogue with all of you. I would also like to extend my thanks to Alejandro, Jennifer, and Petros for their contributions during this event. And I am looking forward to exchanging views with all of you during our conversation. I understand that I have been allocated between 25-30 minutes for my presentation. I am very interested in your views and exchanging, opinions with you about the text. So my presentation will take about 20-22 minutes. And to maximize our time together, I have structured my talk into 3 parts. First, I will speak about background and process. In the initial segment, I will provide insights into the genesis of the reform process, outlining its key characteristics and the underlying rationale behind them. Second, I will describe the interest-based approach, which was the central element of the informal DS reform process. In this part of my presentation, I will touch upon the concept of an interest-based approach and its significance. Understanding this approach will help contextualize the substantive aspects of the reform text, manage expectations regarding unresolved issues, and shed light on the reservations expressed by certain members. And finally, in the third part of my presentation, I will speak about the substantive elements of the reform. In this part, I will offer a concise overview of the substantive components contained in the consolidated text as it was made available to the public via document job/gc/385, which I am pretty sure all of you have read and read the small print also. So during my presentation, I will refrain from disclosing confidential information or attributing proposals to specific members. Also, I will avoid commenting on individual members' views on specific issues raised during the formal process. So let's dive into the first part of my presentation, focusing on the background and process. I will not delve into the reasons behind our current situation, assuming that we are all well aware of the issues at hand, the ministerial mandate to establish a fully functional dispute settlement system accessible to all by 2024, and the directive from ministers at the Abu Dhabi Ministerial Conference to accelerate work in line with the MC13 mandate. We also know what are the US concerns and what members think about how the system should operate. So instead, I will discuss when and how the informal process commenced, outlining its key characteristics. And for that, let me recall that the United States initiated the process in early 2022, inviting almost all members to participate. The process introduced the concept of interest into discussions aiming to identify what elements of the dispute settlement system matter to members and why. The process, or the US-led process, comprised two main phases. The first focused on identifying members' interests regarding the dispute settlement system, with discussions revealing various perspectives on issues such as the appeal mechanism. Differentiating between interests and positions required clarification in that phase, with some members initially struggling to grasp the distinction. So it's not easy to distinguish between interest and positions. And this is an element that we all learned together through the informal process and was instrumental in the way we approach the conversations. The second phase of the US-led process involved exploring conceptual approaches to address this interest, encouraging innovative thinking beyond the constraints of the DSU. These discussions, although abstract, fostered a deeper understanding of members' diverse views and provided valuable insights into potential solutions. So the idea was not to say we want to achieve this particular interest through what we have in the DSU, but rather to think about what other options do we have to achieve a specific interest. Overall, the US-led process yielded a compilation of more or less 230 members' interests, many of which overlapped or were similar. However, discussing these interests facilitated a nuanced understanding of members' preferences regarding the operation of the dispute settlement system. Following the second phase of the US-led interest-driven process, members collectively categorized and compiled conceptual approaches aimed at addressing identified interests. And in the middle of this exercise, MC12 occurred, resulting in a mandate to restore the dispute settlement system by 2024. In this manner, members expressed a desire to initiate formal discussions to comply with this mandate. And let me underscore the term formal discussions. So by the end of 2022, pressure mounted to commence these formal conversations either under the auspices of the DSB or the General Council, leading to the suggestion that a facilitator be appointed. Although consultations took place among members and the General Council chair at the time, consensus on the facilitator's designation proved elusive. And while most members supported my appointment as the informal facilitator, one member objected to a formal process, advocating for a consensus-based approach to appointing a facilitator. At the end, it was decided that the informal process would not require formal designation by the General Council or the DSB chair, resulting in an informal process with me as the facilitator. And by the way, I didn't seek this role. I was asked by members to fulfill the role of the facilitator. So I convened the first meeting of this informal process on February 17, 2023, with room E at the WTO full of delegates. And the process differed from traditional WTO approaches, emphasizing inclusivity, transparency with WTO members, confidentiality regarding external parties. It was member-driven, bottom-up, and interest-based, non-attributional conversations. The process prioritized confidentiality and non-attribution to foster trust and creativity among delegates. That was the reason. Recognizing that delegates operate under specific instructions from their capitals. Transparency was maintained through plenary sessions where decisions were made collectively, with all members receiving documents simultaneously. Small delegations were actively engaged to ensure their perspectives were considered. And that's how we ended with the number of meetings that Alejandro was explaining at the beginning of this conversation. Over 350 meetings, including 110 plenary sessions, happened over the past year. And these provided ample opportunities for members' participation. So if a member missed 1, 2, maybe 3, maybe 10 meetings, they had another 100 meetings to participate in plenary sessions and catch up with the conversations. The resulting text, publicly available, reflects 2 years of discussions and careful craftsmanship. Initial ideas were requested from members through an electronic form, shaping the scope of the reform. Over 70 initial ideas were tabled by members, and these defined the scope of the reform process. It was members-driven. Following refinement and development of these ideas, legal text drafting involved 52 delegates tasked with reflecting discussions held in plenary sessions. The zero draft aimed to encapsulate members' interests, concerns, and respect the agreed terms and conditions that we discussed over more or less 10 months and was the continuation of the ULS process the previous year. The zero draft was an incomplete text. We had many placeholders about many elements that we couldn't complete when we put together the zero draft. Subsequent iterations addressed pending issues and revisions, with all discussions held in open plenary sessions. The public document represents the 7th iteration of the consolidated text, with ongoing discussions on the appeal review mechanism. And here, contrary to some reports, members have explored innovative ideas to address this issue, the issue of appeal, prioritizing agreement on concepts before engaging in drafting exercises to ensure optimal outcomes. So this is important because now I'm going to move to the second part of my presentation to describe in better terms what is this interest-based approach in more detail, and explaining how different interests can be achieved through various means. So as Alejandro indicated in his introduction, and is outlined in my report contained in document 385, I provided an illustrative example of the interest-based approach. And for those who have not yet read this, I will summarize this example. Just consider a scenario where 2 individuals visit a market to purchase a pumpkin, but only one remains. In a position-based negotiation, they might engage in a win-lose situation where one person claims the pumpkin entirely, leaving the other empty-handed. Alternatively, they could compromise by splitting the pumpkin, resulting in suboptimal outcomes for both. However, an interest-based approach aims to uncover the underlying interests driving each party. For instance, one person may seek the pumpkin for decoration purposes, while the other desires it for a soup. Through an interest-based approach, they can collaborate to purchase the pumpkin jointly, share the cost equally, and divide the pumpkin according to their respective needs, ensuring optimal utilization. This method ensures mutual satisfaction, maximizing the value of the pumpkin. Similarly, since February 2023, the informal process on dispute settlement reform has embraced open discussions with members to elucidate their interests and concerns behind their proposals, akin to understanding each member's purpose with the pumpkin. Subsequently, we deliberated on the implementation of potential agreements, defining the terms and conditions of each solution. This potential agreement was then documented, reflecting the discussed terms and conditions, and rigorously reviewed and refined to optimize results. Only then we move to draft legal text. The interest-based approach offers a significant advantage by mitigating power imbalances and fostering inclusive dynamics, enabling every member to contribute meaningfully. By prioritizing interests and concerns over leverage, fairness and equality for all members are ensured, irrespective of their size or status. This ensures that our collective pursuit of optimal solutions remain untainted by external factors. What's more, this levels the playing field for small members, as they can ensure that their interests and concerns are fully addressed in a potential outcome. The outcome of interest-based negotiations is a text, as Alejandro also indicated, devoid of square brackets, color coding, attributions, or other markers typical of position-based negotiations. Through collective efforts to maximize outcomes, the text transcends individual national instances, embodying a shared pursuit of common goals. While solution presenters may diverge from initial positions, they adeptly address core interests and concerns, as illustrated by the pumpkin example, where each member acquires the essential part desired from the outcome. And in light of this, and this is very important, it is crucial to contextualize certain reservations expressed by members regarding the consolidated text. And I urge you to carefully review the detail and the fine print. Some of these reservations may simply reiterate members' initial positions. It is important to note that the consolidated text does not mirror the exact initial position of any member. Rather, it represents the most balanced calibration achievable, at least at this point in time, striving to reconcile the interests and concerns as articulated by members. So moving forward, it will be valuable to explore in the next phase of the discussions which interests and concerns have yet to be addressed. It is my personal view that this will be instrumental towards achieving the restoration of the dispute settlement by 2024. Otherwise, we risk coming back to a position-based negotiation. Because if a member is saying, I don't see my positions reflected in the text, this is a way to say, I'm sorry, I don't care about your interests and concerns. It is my position that should prevail over the position of the rest of the members. And this is position-based negotiations that have proven in the WTO to lead to suboptimal outcomes, if there is any outcome at all. Finally, let me go into the last part of my presentation, providing insights into the substantive elements of the consolidated text. First, it's crucial to clarify that, contrary to some reports, the draft consolidated text aims not to replace, but to complement or clarify the DSU. Therefore, both instruments must be interpreted in tandem. Certain elements in the consolidated text may necessitate amendments to the DSU, a topic for further discussion in the next phase of the conversations. Secondly, you may have observed that many proposed measures adopt the form of incentives or disincentives. These seek to alter behaviors and cultural approaches towards the dispute settlement system. Let's take a couple of examples. For instance, page or word limits aim to streamline and expedite cases, encouraging disputing parties to focus on essential aspects for resolution. While some view this positively, others question its arbitrary nature or potential impact on parties' rights, especially in complex cases. But if you read the small print in the chapter, you will find that members undertook efforts to reconcile, streamlining, and expediting cases with the need to provide sufficient room for presenting those cases. This might be achieved through the introduction of flexibilities, but at the same time ensuring that those flexibilities will not become the norm. Another example is ADRs, Alternative Dispute Resolution Mechanisms, and arbitration, which offer avenues to resolve disputes through less litigious means. However, you may have noticed that their use remains voluntary and contingent upon agreement by disputing parties, avoiding procedural complications. So I have read some reports saying that it was a pity not to have ADRs being compulsory. But members recognize the importance of preserving the voluntary nature of these mechanisms. The thing with what we are putting in the text is to offer a more complete range of options to resolve disputes. But it will be up to the disputing parties to decide when and how to utilize these tools. In fact, members recognize that not all disputes are suitable for resolution through ADRs or arbitration. Upon the decision's implementation or the implementation of the consolidated text, it will be significant to witness members' collective understanding of how the system should operate and their expectations. And you can look at chapters on guidelines for adjudicators and secretariat support to exemplify this collective vision. Transparency is another good example. Transparency emerges as a nuanced consideration, balancing interest in accountability and capacity building with concerns about undue influence or misinterpretation by stakeholders and the media. The concept of delayed transparency seeks to reconcile these divergent viewpoints, moving away from the binary choice between transparency or no transparency. Now, regarding the appeal mechanism, discussions explore novel concepts to reconcile different members' views. The fact that the draft decision is silent about appeal does not mean that members are not addressing this issue or that members will not find a solution to it. I hear reports that even venture to say that members have renounced to a two-tier binding system. Members are not even having that conversation. The interest-based approach allows for exploration beyond binary choices, fostering confidence that a solution amenable to all WTO members is attainable. These are examples about how members address the elements in the consolidated text. I am, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, very interested about hearing your views about the specific elements of the text, and I am open to elaborating on any topics during the question and answer session. In conclusion, an interest-based negotiation represents the best and perhaps the only chance to restore the dispute settlement system. It's imperative to evaluate the draft decision with an understanding of members' diverse views and the collaborative efforts to reconcile them. Constructive conversations demonstrate that achieving solutions addressing all members' interests and concerns is feasible. And thank you once again for the invitation. I am ready to address any question you may have.
Thank you very much, Marco. Amazing presentation, amazing work. Congratulations. It's a pity for the system that you will no longer be conducting these consultations, but I'm sure that with your knowledge and experience, you will still be able to indirectly help the members, the WTO, to make further progress in this endeavor to improve the dispute settlement system. Let me turn now to our commentators. Petros, you are first, but I think that ladies should come in first. So why don't we give the floor to Jennifer?
No, I think we should start with Petros, because I would rather key off of what I think Petros was prepared to say. So
Okay.
I will defer to Petros.
And this way you can contradict whatever Petros has to say.
Excellent. So I have prepared a short PowerPoint. I divide my comments in, let's say, technical issues and more policy-oriented points. On technical issues, I think I divide between strong points, weaker points, and omissions in my view, of course. To me, the strongest point, and that's where I say kudos to Professor Dr. Molina Tejeda, is that we have a document. I mean, if we had this conversation a few months back and nobody would bet money that we'll have a document by March 2024. It's in and of itself an achievement. What I like very much is mediation reinforced, because I believe in times of crisis, mediation is probably the best way to go forward. Myself, I have published already papers saying that issues like national security should never go to panels. There are some natural candidates. There are no candidates, but the direction, I think, is clear. I like very much paragraph 31, which is something that was invoked a couple of times in case law, but not consistently, that you cannot use information, promises, whatever, in mediation. In panels, it was between consultations and panel process. Now they take it one step further. To me, it makes perfect sense. If I were, if I were the members, I mean, the membership, I would merge 5 and 25 DSU. To me, it doesn't make much sense to have this arbitrary distinction. I can see very well how arbitration can function better with, let's say, active involvement by the DG. I also like nominations of non-nationals. To me, it's the step in the right direction. I don't, there was some provision like that way back in NAFTA. I mean, to me, it makes perfect sense to look for people around and depoliticize the selection process this way. Now, oops, just a second, because something is happening here. Yeah, oops, sorry, it went too far here. What I think is a less strong, weak, maybe it's too strong a word, but Marco is a good friend of mine. He gets the message. I don't understand the paragraph about precedent. I mean, of course, the WTO is not about stare decisis, that much is clear, but how on earth can courts function without precedent? I mean, if a court says black, white, and gray on more or less the same transaction, depending on who are the disputing parties, it loses credibility within 5 seconds. I understand where all this is coming from, of course, but to me, it doesn't make much sense to say precedent doesn't matter. Of course it matters. I mean, even if it is de facto precedent. I'm not very happy with the backdoor remedies, Title VI. For those of you who are my age, between 30 and 40, they should remember a book by Claude Barfield, 2001, and a huge discussion that took place in the Brookings Institution at the time between Bob Hudek, John Jackson, my colleague at Columbia University, Don Davis. To me, backdoor remedies might give panelists the wrong incentives. I might start reasoning, thinking about how will the membership, what is acceptable to the membership, and not what is coherent in terms of. So I'm not a big fan of this. I never understood the emphasis on qualifications of panelists. It's an empty shell. I mean, if I go by revealed preference and I see who becomes a panelist, quite frankly, how can qualifications remedy this? I also am not a big fan of seeing the DG and the Secretariat appointing panelists. I think we would just increase agency costs this way. In my view, the judges, the panelists, the whatever, if it is, I would rather have a one-instance body, or if it is an appellate body, it's irrelevant. They should be appointed only by the members, no involvement of the Secretariat there. The page limit on submissions, could impair the right of defense. I understand the flexibilities point, and again, it's a very well taken point. But I personally would include limits on panel reports. I don't understand panel reports anymore. I recently read a panel report of 300 and something pages, and it is one issue, 345 pages. This is I think where the distortion is. Why doesn't it move? Oops. On omissions, I was a little bit, I said they discussed all those things, and then they didn't discuss, to me, a key issue, the remedies. No matter how you look at the WTO, bargaining power matters at the end of the day, and WTO players are unequal. This is why some can sit back and accept hostile reports and live with them forever, and there is no discussion on remedies. I would expect more of a discussion on who should serve as a judge. To me, the current situation is far from ideal, very far from ideal. I look honestly with, I don't know what is the best word, but I almost become melancholic when I look at who was serving in panels during the GATT years and who is serving in panels nowadays. And I don't think it makes much sense to continue with an appellate body, if you ask me. I think this function can, if the WTO membership, I don't think the appellate body record is, I wouldn't put a positive sign at the end of the day after 25 years. And if I look at Alan Sykes is a fantastic paper going through the functions of the appellate body, which I strongly recommend, and explaining why none of them was performed to the satisfaction, to the intellectual satisfaction of outsiders like myself. But I think this function can be overtaken by panels anyway, if we appoint 10, 15 top women and men, and we entrust them with the possibility to decide and plan on whatever is of precedential value. Finally, when it comes to policy, and with this I stop, I wish I could be as optimistic as the report and say by the end of 2024 we'll have something. To me, there is a time dimension. There are elections in the US in November. I cannot see the US moving. They didn't move the needle one bit during the Biden administration from the previous administration. I cannot see how it can happen between now and November. And depending on who is, even if things go the right way and you have Biden back in the White House, quite frankly, within a month, how on earth can you wrap up what you didn't do in the previous, I don't know how many years? So one thing I would urge those entrusted with policy to think about is there a future in compulsory third-party adjudication? I'm all in favor myself, if you ask me. It's a first best, but we have to cut the cloth to the size of the dress. We have to be realistic here. Either we have to do some, I think, the membership summary balancing, agree ex ante that some cases like 21 go out of, remain outside the docket, and then maybe we can have compulsory third-party adjudication, or start thinking in terms of International Court of Justice and reciprocity-based optional clause. I think continuing to believe that we can somehow go back to 1994 and have compulsory third-party adjudication with 2 instances is what comes very close to the textbook definition of a pipe dream. And I stop here.
Thank you, Petros. Always challenging, always imaginative. A big contribution. Thank you. Professor Wenhua, can we have the benefit of your wisdom?
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador Jara. So I have no power slides to show, but I do have something to share with my distinguished panelists. Well, it's a true honor for me to take part in today's discussion. But indeed, I think it's also a good opportunity for me to read the text again in its entirety, word by word and paragraph by paragraph. So as Marco has just described, the consolidated text is clearly the result of a great deal of detailed technical discussions, and it is an important result of bottom-up interest-based negotiations. Members have put a lot of energy and wisdom into the text, devising a number of, I think, innovative mechanisms and trying to be as thorough and complete as possible on the technical details. From my own experience and as a negotiator on the DSU review and from the legal and technical point of view, I think the consolidated text also fully reflects the characteristic of WTO negotiations on the reforming the DSU. It's always technical, lengthy, complex, somewhat redundant. So indeed, after having read the full text, I have a mixed feeling, and with the incitement, with concern, and with some uncertainties. First of all, I would like to say there are some areas of improvement that address long-standing pragmatic concerns of the membership. So those changes are driven by necessity, and the new solutions in the consolidated text and deserve recognition. So for example, streamline the panel procedures and improving their efficiency. So many of those improvements seem to have a positive value. Examples include adjusting the order of the submission of written comments and only have one substantive meeting, and also some others. And the second point, the second example is updating the indicative list and improving the selection process of panelists, of course. And I also agree to some extent with Petros that adding some criteria for the panelists, and even sometimes subject it to the decision of the DSB's chair to examine whether those candidates are qualified and maybe cause some problems. But generally speaking, and it's good that we could use this opportunity to streamline and to make the selection process better than before. And another example is improving the compliance and increasing the chance of achieving mutually agreed solutions. Of course, one important improvement concerning the accessibility issue and to tackle the problems, the difficulties faced by the developing countries. Marco also mentioned the increasing transparency. I think the text in the consolidated text, the new rules in the consolidated text is really very good one, because it's a big change with the current transparency rules in the DSU. So those issues have been indeed, and the several points, the issues I have mentioned, and have been the focus of the DSU review for Ambassador Jara mentioned started in 2001 and lasted almost 20 years, but regretfully, it did not came to a conclusion. And the second point I would like to say that I think, from my perspective, there are a number of areas where improvement may be of limited value, or partially because I think they do not appear to be based on the needs of the membership. So their future usefulness is uncertain. My feeling is the example I would like to point is concerning the alternative dispute resolution and arbitration. Of course, the consolidated text uses a lot of words in this respect. It almost have 15 pages concerning this. And we know that Article 5 has rarely been used in the history of the WTO. So indeed, as I could recall from the DSU review negotiation started in 2001, this issue has not been raised and discussed by members in that review. To some extent, I think that this showed that there is not much real demand from members in this regard. So therefore, even with the detailed provision in the consolidated text, it's likely that members will continue to make a little use of the new rules in the future. So that's the second observation I would like to see. Third one is that the consolidated text also contains some new rules and designs, such as guidelines for adjudicators and page limits by determining the complexity of the case. Also includes some discipline measures for adjudicators who exceed the time frame both reputation and remuneration. So while attempting to solve and respond to existing problems, it is worth further considering and whether those new problems or whether new problem will arise in the future that have not been adequately foreseen. I think those issues deserve a further discussion. Fourth, as the last point, as Molina said, there is no concrete proposal for an appeal mechanism. Members will also need to further discuss the issue of in-try-to force and transition. And such kind of transition rules may need to take into account how to deal with those reports that has been appealed into the void, because I didn't find a solution in the consolidated text in this concerning this issue. I would just share a little bit more my thought concerning whether we need an appeal mechanism or what might be the solution. My general feeling is that, well, there are two modes that members could consider to solve this problem. Mode one would be to create a new appeal procedures that would be very different from the current one in the DSU. These new appeal procedures might not be acceptable to many members. So the situation could technically lead to prolonged negotiations. So in the coming several months, members may engage in further discussion concerning how to design a new appeal mechanism. But I have no confidence that they could find a solution in this regard. The second mode would be to consider for members to consider whether change the way they find a solution by creating additional procedure arrangements that would allow cases between certain members not to be appealed. And after a panel report, the panel report would be adopted by the DSB, while leaving for the other members, the case leaving the disputes, the cases between other members still subject to the original procedure. I call it a kind of coexistence. I also explained in detail in a recent published paper. Personally, I think this might be more technical feasible. Of course, it depends on whether all members can agree to it, especially the United States. So regarding the MC13 decision on the dispute settlement reform, members are authorized to continue discussing. The current focus is how to start the new negotiation process and what mode to adopt. Secondly, I think whether members would be able to only focusing on the remaining issues, namely the appeal issues. Otherwise, and I don't think members would have enough time to finally get a solution, get an outcome, and for the adoption by the GC or by the General Council by the end of this year. So, and for the sake of same time, I'll stop here. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Professor Wenhua. And now let me turn to Jennifer. All yours.
Well, thank you very much. And it's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. And I'm happy to be involved, if you will, at the end to try to maybe bring some of this together. But I do want to start by really commending Marco, because I think his effort was really quite extraordinary. So I'm going to agree with Petros that, you know, a huge effort was made, and I think real kudos when you look at the details of the document. And the second thing that I at least would start out in terms of my thanks and appreciation for the work that went into this is I do think it was very important to start with this interest-based process approach, in part because it did follow on this effort that the United States had started. And I do think it's very significant because, again, my own view is if the Biden administration is reelected, there is already a lot of buy-in to what is in this document. There's already a lot of work that is being done sort of behind the scenes that brought us to this point that I think would make it, at least in the realm of the possible, that if the Trump administration if the Biden administration is reelected, to see something move forward. Obviously, to me, if Trump is reelected, you know, all bets are off on everything connected to trade and the WTO.
Jennifer, you're muted.
Okay, I'm sorry, was I muted before? I don't know, something has happened. I didn't touch anything and I'm all of a sudden muted. Okay,
No,
maybe
just
I'm getting a
5 seconds.
message I should be hearing. Anyway, second thing to me that is really important is even though this document did not address and did not make suggestions for an appellate review mechanism, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. To me, it did set up throughout the entirety of the
Jennifer, again, you're muted. I think, Jennifer.
Sorry, I'm not touching anything and it just all of a sudden is muting me.
I think it's Marco. It's Marco who does it from distance.
Somebody is saying, no,
Of
stop.
course not. I am very happy to hear Jennifer's comments. I would have muted you, Petros.
All right, I promise I'm not touching. Anyway, so, but secondly, to me, it is really important that a number of the kind of key concerns that the United States has been raising within the context of the appellate body have nonetheless found a way to be at least, discussed, raised, potentially addressed within this document itself. And to me, that is really important because that means no matter what happens in terms of a resolution of the appellate mechanism, a number of these key concerns have been addressed. And the issue is, whether everyone is happy about the addressing, but I mean, everything from trying to sort of limit the procedures, not just the appeal, but the procedures themselves to only the findings that are really necessary to resolve the dispute. Again, the issues of discussing the relevant issues maybe in a subsequent WTO body gives, again, an opportunity for the United States to sort of, again, try to test the waters to see whether other members actually agree with them on things like whether unforeseen development should be read into the safeguards agreement, or on zeroing in dumping cases, or on any of these other issues. It is at least providing a sort of alternative forum where the United States is wanting to argue that, oh, there's all this consensus for our viewpoint. Well, let's test it out and let's see, if it's tried out in another forum, how it would work. I mean, to me, the establishment of this advisory working group gives a real opportunity to revisit some of these decisions that the United States is contending were so wrongly decided. It would at least give you an opportunity to have, kind of at a distance a little bit from those decisions, a serious engagement on, is the United States right that these were so wrongly decided? Let's have a discussion and a debate on that. So at least it is giving a lot of these opportunities to address some of these issues. A couple of problems, I will say, that are clearly there. I mean, one is all of these other alternatives to revisit, redebate, rethink it all, at some level come back to that core issue of consensus. Because again, if anything is seriously going to come out of either the individual committees, or more importantly, I think this advisory working group, at some level, it comes back to this, whether you can come up with a consensus. And so as long as the WTO remains in a place in which it's so easy to block a consensus, all you got to do is raise that flag and say, no, I don't agree, without really any serious reasons, without any really serious substance behind your objection. There, I do think, some of these very good mechanisms that are put in place are going to become somewhat problematic. The two then last issues that I will raise is, maybe this does, but maybe this doesn't. But I have always been of the view that I don't see the United States agreeing to come back to a binding dispute settlement system without addressing two kind of key issues. One is on national security. And the issue of how do you deal with objections that are raised on the basis of Article 21. Again, you've obviously seen this play out in everything the US has argued in these cases, but I do think something is going to need to happen to be very clear on what's going to happen in that situation. Again, many people have proposed that you go immediately to an Article 23 compensation kind of a process, and I can imagine that potentially being an approach where, yes, you can play the Article 21 card and say, I don't want this dispute to move forward. But on the flip side, you have to immediately agree to consider payment of compensation for those that have been harmed by that measure. On the one hand, that could be an approach. To me, it has, an upside of at least taking this out and making it a little bit costly to play the 21 card. And on the other end, at some level, it is saying to the rest of the world, you have to accept the notion that you don't have an unfettered right to invoke Article 21. But nonetheless, I think national security is going to have to be addressed. And at some level, the question will come also for the United States about whether or not the ability to go to the advisory working group or to the committees, that might consider it will do enough to address the US's major concerns over trade remedies, meaning the issue of unforeseen developments within safeguards. That's, a huge issue, the zeroing issue within anti-dumping, and the public body within the subsidies and countervailing duty context. To me, some way to think about, is there any way to adjust those issues, is going to be central to whether or not, at the end, the US can take it on board. And I'm going to touch then last on the appeals process and or the appellate body. And I definitely appreciate Petros's sense of, do we really need an appellate review? And to me, that I think is a question that we can debate for some considerable period of time. I do think what is very clear to me from all of the documents and everything else is what we are not ever going to get back to is the appellate body as it used to be. I just don't see that really happening in any near-term time frame. So I think we're looking at something different than what we had before. To me, the most critical issue is that you have to do away with an appeal into the void. I mean, you simply have to get back to a binding dispute settlement system. Otherwise, all of these reforms, to me, are not going to make that much difference. So I think it is going to be critical to figure out a way to not allow an appeal into the void. And I do think there's a lot of kernels in this document and in the discussions to think about. To me, an option may be, if you will, effectively a case-by-case approach to an appeal, so that you have the MPIA sitting on the one hand, and you may have some form of a reconstituted or ad hoc appellate review, where on a case-by-case basis, the parties can agree that, we certain parties agree that we will always go to whatever is the appellate mechanism that we agree that we will always do it. And if countries like the United States say, no, we will not agree, we'll only agree on a case-by-case basis, you could think about that kind of variable system as long as your option is either you accept the panel report, or on a case-by-case basis, it could be even, I'll agree to appeals with certain members and not others, I'll agree to appeals over certain issues and not others, but a case-by-case approach, but you have to agree to one or the other. You simply cannot continue, to appeal into the void. So I do think there are at the end of the day, ways to think about alternatives to appeal, as long as the understanding is at the end of the day, the system is binding, and whatever comes out of the process gets adopted, in some form. So, again, I am actually optimistic that there could be a way to get there. If the elections turn out the way that they do. So I think there's a huge amount to work for. I actually think there is more interest and engagement on the United States' part than may be apparent, from the outside. But I would agree with Petros that nothing is going to happen, in terms of a formal sign off until after the election. And I'll maybe stop there and hope that we can now engage in more discussion and questions. I do have a lot of responses to some of what Petros said, but I'll hold those maybe for another day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jennifer. I'm sure that others too have a lot to say about what you said, and Petros and Professor Wen, and of course, Marco. So I open the floor. Who would like to chip in? Gabriel Mazzo. S'il te
Hi,
plaît.
everyone. In my very personal capacity, I was going to say 2-3 things quickly. First, I very much agree with what the last speaker said. One approach could be that there's a commitment that there's something binding. So if you appeal, then you give up having the panel report binding, but if you refuse that there's an appeal, then you know, it's necessarily the panel. So a mechanism where you always guarantee that there's something binding. I read a paper from Alan Syke where he suggested that the possibility of appeal be given through a permission request and decision taken by the appellate body. And one of his arguments was that the appellate body, if it behaves like the US Supreme Court a little bit, will wait until it has a few panel reports before hearing a case. The good point on that is that the case law could become a bit more sophisticated when you have dissenting opinions at the level of panel and all this. I personally believe it's great intellectually, but for the US to give the power to the appellate body to decide whether or not a case goes on appeal is difficult. But we can think of mechanism whereby some type of decisions, for instance, security, could go to appeal, but only with an advisory conclusion. So it's not binding. So I'll stop there because we've been thinking also informally, because we're not supposed to, about solutions. And I think the only way out, because it cannot be the old system. I know the American is Canadian. It cannot be the old system. We need to think of a system where there will be, as mentioned just before, sort of possibilities, but where there's always something binding. So permission, no permission, etc. But it's fundamental that Article 2122, that is the multilateral surveillance, which is, in my view, more exceptional than the appellate body, possibility of going back to the old panel, 21.5, automatic sanctions, retaliation, all that has to go back on track. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabrielle. As usual, fantastic contribution. We look forward to the day when you're free to speak. Alan?
First of all, hats off to the original speaker and to the commentators for an excellent job, and really kudos to Marco Molina for his effort, because he's gotten us further than the committee work and the DSU work, DSB work for decades. So we're, as a number of commentators have said, we're further down the road than we were, which is a great benefit. Just a comment on appeals into the void to underline what Jennifer said and some others. How do we get from here to there? When I was an acting DG, 1/4 of a DG, during the 6-month interregnum between Azevedo and Alejandro Jara, I was against the acceptance of further appeals into the void by the Secretariat. My 3 brethren said, it's not, we're caretakers. We can't decide as the Secretariat whether we accept appeal or not. We look at the DSU and it says you file an appeal, you have an appeal, whether there's anything to appeal to or not. What my suggestion is that if some members who at Abu Dhabi come back to Geneva and they say, Secretariat, we don't think you have the authority to accept appeals when there is no appellate body, at least not in 2025, when we've all agreed we would solve this problem and have dispute settlement again that is binding. Okonjo-Iweala turns to the members and says, this is a quandary. I don't know what to do. I need instruction from the General Counsel. Just tell me if you think I can accept appeals, further appeals into the void. If I have that instruction from you, I'll go ahead. The way the WTO wonderful consensus operates, We'll see if there's a consensus. Do all the members agree that the Director General has authority to file these appeals in a mailbox that is never any collection of the mail, somewhat similar to the U.S. Postal Service nowadays. And my operational suggestion is get to the point where you say, look, the whole institutional change was not the creation of the WTO in 1995. It was the creation of binding dispute settlement. That's what we talked about. I was in Geneva at the time. Not in a government position, but no one was talking about how important it was that a WTO was created. They were talking about curbing U.S. unilateralism. And the U.S., for its part, wanted to curb the common agricultural policy through dispute settlement. And now we've lost it. If there was a consensus, that is the one item of absolute consensus, that dispute settlement is binding. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alan. Anyone else? Jesse?
Yeah, hi. Just a few words, because sometimes when I hear this, the Molina text, hi, Marco, by the way, I think it was a fantastic effort. When I look at the Molina text, I hear a lot of people sort of picking apart little elements of it and thinking, well, maybe this isn't quite right, or this is not exactly what I like to see, et cetera. I really think we have to remember the context in which the process was started and ask whether it's moving us towards the fundamental objectives, which I agree with Alan. There are basically two issues. The key issue is not really two-tier dispute settlement. The key issue is binding dispute settlement. And so I think we have to look at Marco's text first and foremost as asking whether it provides a facilitating environment that might allow us to get back to that point, at least partially. And in that respect, I think it's extraordinary. I mean, for years we heard that the Americans are never telling us what we need. They say what they don't like, but they don't tell us what would satisfy their problems. Now we have a text which in many ways tries to, in a sort of a balanced way, address some of those issues. Everything from panelist qualifications, secretariat expertise, judicial restraint, judicial economy for all adjudicators, for example, and not just for panels, obiter dicta, treaty interpretation, although it's a very limited, precedential value, member control, role of the secretariat, transparency. So many of the things that the Americans were saying, oh, we can't stand this, these are reasons why we're walking away. There is some kind of an effort which seems to have achieved substantial buy-in, if not consensus, that there are some issues there that, could be resolved through a text. That doesn't mean that this is necessarily going to be enough to sort of bring the Americans back on board without addressing some other problems. But I think the U.S. can now point to, in this text, to many different ways in which the membership, for the first time, is perhaps appearing to acknowledge that, there are some issues that could perhaps be regulated, and we can address some of the concerns that have, resulted in you walking away. Now, whether it's going to be sort of full binding dispute settlement with comprehensive appeals, I don't know. And if this set of efforts doesn't bring the United States back on board, then it may be sort of on the United States. But I do think that that this text creates so when people say we have nothing in here about the appeal mechanism, I would say there's tons, and for that matter, about binding dispute settlement. I'd say this text is full of stuff which addresses indirectly the possibility of restoring an appeal mechanism. So I think it's an extraordinary text. I think it serves the purpose, to a certain extent, of putting the ball back in the U.S.'s court, because it speaks to so many of the things they've been complaining about. It's hard. I don't know what the U.S. is finally going to want, and maybe the U.S. just doesn't ever want binding dispute settlement again. But this text is an extraordinary effort to try and address American concerns, which we never saw before. You look at the Walker principles, there's nothing there. That's not true of this text. So I think it's a very significant development.
Thank you very much, Jesse. I share many of your thoughts in this respect. And before I give the floor to Lou, I'd like to make a comment, to ask a question in that respect. One comment is that one speaks of the U.S. concerns. I'd just like to point out that over the years, many of those concerns are shared by many other members. Not that the other members agreed with the paralysis of the appellate body. That was solely the responsibility of the United States. Having said that, I have a comment, because I've heard in the past that, at least for the United States and perhaps others, the fact that the question is, even if we do reform the DSU and preserve a binding dispute settlement in whatever shape, we still have an underlying problem, is that some of the substantive rules in which we have a breakdown of a consensus about their meaning and so on. For example, on subsidies, because one thing that perhaps should not be allowed to happen is to rely on the dispute settlement system to solve the problems on which there is a wide divergence over the meaning of the rules and their extent. So that's also an issue which I'd like to have some views here. Lou, to be followed by Valerie.
Thank you, Alex, and many thanks to Marco and the commentators. I want to follow up on what you and Jesse and others have discussed about the appeal and appellate body. To further it a little bit, because in Marco's text, it doesn't give any details. It's just with the, I think it's item 3 with the title Work in Progress. And also in Marco's report, I think it was December last year, to the DSB, Marco said that members have conceptual difference, I think using his words. So just to follow up, what you said is that we know that the US have concerns on how the appellate body members behave and how they go beyond their mandate, so on and so forth. I mean, we know that. Marco also said that members have reckoned on this. And if we could, to a certain extent, successfully resolve the American interests or concerns, the question is that, can we bring back the appeal system with the appellate body? So that's a question. I mean, we don't know what the US has said, but if we read very carefully what EU, China, and some other members have said in their statements at DSB, General Counsel, and other occasions, basically they say that we want a two-tiered system back with the appellate body, and that's probably in their eyes what means by the MC12 mandate as the so-called fully kind of mechanism, a DSU mechanism. So I just want to know how can we do that. I mean, Gabriela and others have said about the coexistence of a kind of flexible options, and also probably some issues between some members going to others. But I mean, those ideas, how they are accommodated in the discussion, are they really discussed there? We don't know. So I would rather hear a little bit more from Marco and also others who may know this. We have some ambassadors here, probably also hear from them. Thank you.
Thank you. Valerie, please, the benefit of your past experience and present wisdom.
Thank you, Alejandro. First of all, let me, I don't want to miss out on the opportunity to publicly congratulate Marco on this work. It is really extraordinary. The text is, like, I agree very much with what Jesse says. There's so much there. Yes, DSU review went on for years and years and years, but there's lots of new stuff in there that I think is valuable. And the discussions obviously were very, very rich in very, very many areas. You know, one of the things that I've been harping on for some time is the indicative list, and you know, people want the indicative list to be used more, etc. Well, you know, there are people that have passed away on that list, so that shows you what members have, you know, what they think about that list. It's not really anything other than, you know, a way to give a nod to someone in a political sort of environment. So the fact that there's this idea of having that indicative list die after and not have before the members do is a great idea, and hopefully something will come of that. Petros talks about page limits, and that limits the right of defense. You know, I understand the point, but if there's less argument and less defense, there's going to be shorter panel reports, which is what you're looking for, Petros. I think that you have to be able to find a way to limit the arguments and force members to really focus on what is the core, what are the core issues. And so page limits, you know, the MPIA has them, you can get around them if it's some really, you know, if there is a defense that has to be done in 400 pages, I can't imagine, but if there is one, you can ask for, you know, sort of how to get around the rules. So it's not like they're hard and fast, just like in the MPIA system. It's not hard and fast. It's just a very strong suggestion. But I guess I'd like to, instead of going on about things that everybody already knows about, I guess I just wonder about now what? I mean, we know that unfortunately Marco is not going to be leading this anymore. We know that 24 is a deadline, and we know that that's unlikely to be met given the US election and other things. But is there a sense from Marco or from others now where are we going and what's going to happen? What's going to happen next? Is there a process that has been identified? Because I'm not aware of it, and I just would like to know that it's not just going to take time to get a process together, because there's not much time left before the end of 2024. Thank you, Alejandro, for inviting me to this event.
Thank you, Valerie. I hope those people you mentioned did not pass away because they were on the indicative list. Last but not least, Jonathan, and then I'll give the floor to our commentators and to Marco for a wrap-up.
Thanks very much, and let me add my gratitude, particularly to Marco for not just this morning, but remarkable work in challenging circumstances throughout. I only wish you could continue in that role. It's very late in our session for me to raise this, and Marco may have a quick response. But we've not talked about the responsibility of the members themselves. If you go back to the beginning, we use binding dispute settlement as a bit of a shorthand, but the very delicate compromise to constrain, as Alan Wolf recalls, US 301 was that decisions were not final and not binding until and unless members themselves adopted it. And we switched from positive to negative consensus to do that. So there's no truly independent judiciary, although things have evolved. In my day, and other chairs of the DSB have argued the same, the members themselves have not exercised the kind of collective responsibility they could have in constraining excesses of panels and appellate bodies, in offering agreed interpretations, in volunteering facilitation through good offices, mediation, conciliation, and so on. And it doesn't quite come out in the draft document whether in those 300 meetings there was a meaningful consideration of reaffirming the primacy of the DSB itself, and through the DSB, the members as the ultimate arbiters of the rules in the system. In light of time, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Good point. And now, in reverse order, Jennifer. Sorry, Wenhua.
Well, I think Jennifer should have the the floor.
Jennifer.
All right, if we're strict reverse order, first of all, I will only say I completely agree with Jesse, and I guess that was a lot of what I was trying to say, is I think there is a tremendous amount in this document that is the reason why I am optimistic that maybe the US could move more quickly, because so many of the things that were on that list, if you reread their parade of horribles about the appellate body, a lot of them have been addressed, even if it's not in the context of the appellate body. Secondly, I'm only going to respond really quickly to Jonathan Fried's point here. I actually think if you look at what has been added in this advisory working group and in the notion of taking issues back to the committees of jurisdiction, if you will, I think there is already a reassertion of member control into the process in that way, where you really are asking the members who would be involved in this advisory working group or are sitting at the anti-dumping committee or the subsidies committee to actually engage in the substance in a way that they really haven't been able to before. Because when everything only goes through the DSB, my own view is the DSB then tends to focus on the case of the moment, not the sort of broader picture issue or the way to think about the substance of an underlying issue. And as a result, I think the DSB is somewhat constrained in its ability to think more broadly about a specific legal issue or specific question than might be the case if this advisory working group really were to get going and be very robust. Or again, if issues were to be put back to the relevant committee that has the strongest interest in it, I at least think that might be better than putting it all back on the DSB, where it tends to be very case by case and very member interest, who won, who lost, et cetera, all of that. I share Valerie's question. What next? I mean, what is the process going forward? I hope there really is, kind of a current process, or at least soon a process that would allow us to capitalize on everything that Marco has done, and then to move it forward. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Wenhua, Professor.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Jara. Yes, I just have two quick comments to conclude my remarks. The first one concerning how to solve the problem. I agree with most, I think all speakers that, and it's better that we have a binding system, either it's a 1-tier or 2-tier. But the problem is that different members have different demand and have requests. Most of the members want to have a 2-tier one, and one member and maybe 1 or 2 members they want to have a 1-tier or something like that. So I think the solution might be lying in between. Okay, for those members who would like to have 2 tiers, let them have 2 tiers. So for those members who would like to have 1 tier, okay, we could agree with that. But you cannot block the process because you want 1 tier, you block others from have 2 tiers, or vice versa. So that might be a solution. So I agree with the condition is that have a binding system. So the way that we could reach a binding solution may be different. So concerning the point mentioned, particularly by Petros and Jennifer, concerning, okay, the US would like to see the solution of some substantive issues, national security and trade remedy issues as a precondition to solve the problem of the dispute settlement system. I personally think this is just add a further burden to the ongoing difficult technical discussions, because how to reform the procedures we could discuss in a relatively neutral and technical level. But however, on these other issues, they are not procedure issues, they are substantive issues. You could find the places you want to change the GATT Article 21 or make a clarification. So find another committee to discuss these substantial issues, but not in the DSU negotiations. Otherwise, we cannot conclude it because more objections will come up. Thank you.
Thank you. I will overrule myself and give the floor to Gabrielle, just because I have a soft spot for her.
I just wanted to report again, informally, it's going to come in the press, that it seems that the governments want the debate to take place not in the technical committee, but on the contrary, in the General Council. And apparently, in the informal discussions with the DSB chair, 3 names of ambassador level that members wanted. They wanted an ambassador level facilitator and a number 2 for another mission at high level. The 3 that were proposed declined. So just to share that, I think it's becoming much more a political issue than what some of us could have hoped, a technical issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Petros?
I'll say just in one sentence, I only hope that the membership will properly evaluate the cost of non-WTO, especially the key members. I still see only one leader, and to me it is the US. So I hope in the US they will understand the cost of non-WTO better and move in the right direction, because WTO without dispute settlement doesn't say much. WTO is not World Bank. It's all about enforcing rules. That's all.
A lot of wisdom. Thank you. Marco.
Thank you, Alejandro, and thank you for all the questions and comments. Really appreciated. I will try to address most of them. Let me start by saying that this is truly a collective effort. And the text, I didn't write the text. I didn't draft the text. This was a collective effort by all delegates. And even the revision and the recalibration of each of the elements in the text is a collective effort. So this is truly a members-driven process in which all delegates had an opportunity, and actually they participated in the drafting of the text. In terms of managing, this process, it was challenging, because you can imagine 52 delegates drafting a text with different backgrounds, different, drafting styles, but at the end we managed and we came with these 7 iteration that you know. It is true that, and you have to read the text with this perspective in mind of addressing the interests and concerns of all members, not only the US concerns, but also the concerns that are being shared by all WTO members. And it is true what Jennifer and others have said, that the US concerns are to be addressed not only through the design of any appeal mechanism, but rather through the different elements that we have in the text, focusing on what is necessary to resolve the dispute, street interpretation, the accountability mechanism, the advisory working group. All of these elements are supposed to address totally or partially each of the concerns raised by the US and other delegations. The same happens with accessibility. Accessibility is not to be limited to technical assistance or advisory opinions, or advice or legal opinions. It is also to be looked from the perspective of making the system more affordable, less costly, to make the system more understandable for especially small delegations. It is true that you will find in many of the chapters this concept of members' control. And as I said at the beginning of my presentation, this decision is to be read in tandem with the DSU. So if there are no references or amendments or modifications to the role, for instance, of the DSB, that means that the DSB will continue to operate on the basis of what you find in the DSU. The same happens with respect to the negative consensus and so on. So this is to say that for the time being, there are no changes on that. Not to say that there might not be changes in the future, but it will depend on the parties to have that conversation later. At least during the last year, we didn't consider necessary to change any of these rules for the time being. Now, what's next? I share the disappointment about what happened with the government of Guatemala. And I understand the implications of that, not because I consider myself to be irreplaceable, but that creates additional challenges to the process. Originally, the idea was to come back from Abu Dhabi, to have at least a short period continuing with the formal conversations, and then move to a formal process, which is the interest of many members in the WTO, and trying to find the right equilibrium between, on the one hand, keeping this safe environment for members to discuss, test, and explore different ideas, and on the other hand, also to make this available to the public, and also the participation, direct participation from capitals. Now, what I understand is happening is that members have not been able to identify a new facilitator, and members seem to be ready to go directly to a formal process. Personally, I don't believe that a formal or informal process should make any difference, as long as you continue, or members continue, with the interest-based approach. And this will be fundamental for any facilitator or future chair that takes, the role of facilitating these conversations. Because the moment you say, here, I have 10 different proposals, and I want these proposals to be reflected in the outcome in the text, without explaining what is the interest or the concern behind those proposals, that's simply to switch immediately to a position-based negotiations. And we need to bear in mind that we all are trained in that manner. For us, it took a great deal of time trying to understand the interest-based approach, and actually to get involved into the methodology. So if you ask or have a conversation with any of the DS delegates in Geneva, you will see that all of them understand fully the concept of interest-based approach. And they will tell you, we are identifying these interests, these concerns, and they will tell you how they are trying to reconcile those. But if you move outside the US delegates environment, and you go to ambassadors, you go to capital officials, we come back immediately to the position-based negotiations, which that presents a very high risk of going in a different direction. To me, if we were to move as members to position-based negotiations, I can tell you this is the end of the negotiation. And we are going to end with a DSU review 2.0, in which you will have very nice square brackets with attribution, and there will be no negotiation. And if there will be a negotiation, it will be a suboptimal outcome, because you always will have this need to decide between two options, or a menu of options that you put in the text. And that's not the way I believe would work for the DS review. It is clear from what I read also in the press that now members are looking for an ambassador. And to be honest, I don't think that dispute settlement should be discussed at the political level. I think that there are many technical issues, many technicalities that sometimes are very difficult. And I am not, trying to diminish the value of an ambassador or their knowledge, but it is true that you need experts to discuss dispute settlement. So when you are discussing appeal and you are talking about, a standard of review, the scope of appeal, and these kind of concepts that for anyone outside the legal, environment would say, what's the difference? Well, there are some nuances, there are some specificities that you have to take into account when addressing the different interests and concerns as articulated by members. And if you are going to have a political conversation about that, the risk is to come back very easily to this binary choice between having one-tier or two-tier system, binding or not binding system, appellate body or not appellate body. And it goes south very quickly when you have these two options, because it is clear that members hold different views about conceptual views about how the system should operate. And that goes with, to the loose question, what I meant by different conceptual understandings about the appeal review mechanism. And it is true that on one hand, you have members that are comfortable in having a sort of supranational authority telling you what is the correct interpretation. And in the other hand, you have this view that says, no, these are three individuals that are here to help us, the disputing parties, to resolve our disputes. But they don't concede that they have any authoritative, interpretation to give to members. That's something that remains in the hands of members. When you look at the text, I would like to invite you to look also to the different elements that we introduced. For instance, there were few mentions about the accountability mechanism. The accountability mechanism tells you more or less, or set the expectations of members about how the system should operate, and provides for a mechanism in which members can review the operation of the system and to take action if the system is not operating as intended. The question of the advisory working group is actually one element of bringing back to members certain control, and a good mechanism for members to have these conversations, these difficult conversations that are being decided by adjudicators. Now, I take the point that most of the elements in the advisory working group requires consensus. But if you noticed, at the end, there is one possibility when members cannot agree on a specific interpretation. And that goes to recording the number of members who participated in the meeting and the number of views in one side or the other side of the interpretation. Why is that? Because what we believe is that adjudicators will take into consideration whether members hold different views about what is the correct interpretation about a specific provision. So let's assume that 90% of the members consider that an interpretation is erroneous or shouldn't be that the interpretation to be given by an adjudicator. And only 10% tells you, we disagree. Of course, there will be no consensus. Of course, there will be no authoritative interpretation. But at the end, the outcome is that adjudicators will take into consideration that 90% of the members consider a particular interpretation not to be the correct one. And we would expect adjudicators to be more cautious in the way they approach the interpretations, bearing in mind this. So these are inputs that perhaps will help in addressing the concerns as they have been articulated, considering the limits of the system, because we are not ready, I believe, as members to go in the direction of voting or taking any other decision when it comes to the interpretation of the rules or dispute settlement in general. Perhaps the last issue that I would like to address is this question of appeals, which of course is the most important issue and perhaps the most visible one in the conversations everywhere. I do believe, and I can tell this, every time we will have a conversation on this, that the only way we can address and resolve the issue of the appeal review mechanism is by implementing the interest-based approach. In my view, I think that all members understand and actually are focusing not on this question of whether we should have one-tier or two-tier system, but rather what members are pursuing with an appeal mechanism. And on the one hand, members are interested in having a mechanism to review legal errors of interpretation and correct those. particularly when it comes to the implementing member, because the implementing member will be less inclined to comply if there is an assumption that the decision rendered is an incorrect one. There is also an interest of members to have certain coherence and consistency in legal decisions, because you cannot have, for a similar set of facts, different decisions coming from different tribunals or different adjudicators. So, but on the other hand, we all understand the concerns of the United States. And these are public, so I'm not going to detail those here today. So the question is, it is the right question to ask whether we need an appellate body or not. It is a right question to ask whether we need a two-tier or one-tier system. And we as delegates, we understood that this is not the type of questions we should be answering. The question that we need to resolve is how we can reconcile the different interests and concerns as has been articulated by members, and to the extent possible without resolving the question of the conceptual differences that members hold in respect to what an appeal mechanism or an appeal mechanism should look like. So I am optimistic. I think that when we started this process, we started the process with a view to build confidence, trust among ourselves, and also trust in that the fact that we can deliver if we do things differently. And my hope is that members will continue to use this methodology, which, by the way, is not a new methodology. What is new is that it has been used for the very first time at the WTO, and it seems to be showing that this is perhaps a very good way to go, not only for dispute settlement, but perhaps for other negotiations. And I sincerely hope that this, this exercise in dispute settlement can be replicated in the future in the WTO, because when we resolve the issue of negotiations, probably we are going to use less litigation. That was precisely one of the points made by the United States at some point. So thank you very much again for the opportunity. I find all comments very useful, and it's always nice to see you all on through these kind of activities, and I am looking forward to continue talking to you and exchanging with you views about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. Congratulations once again on a job done. Very impressive contribution to the system. Thank you for your briefing today. We know much more, and I think it enables us to be more helpful, each one of us in our respective circles, to help this process along. And I was thinking that because of your success in this process, that maybe we should ship you to the Middle East or another hotspot in the world to solve other problems. And thank you to our commentators, to Jennifer, to Petros, Professor Wenhua, and to thank other friends who have taken the floor and made comments. All very good. And I bring this to an end. Thanking you for your attention. Over to you, Lou.
Thanks, Alex. Likewise, many thanks to Marco and other speakers. Now, just have one thing to announce that, as I said, we are going to do a few more sessions on MC13 and its results. So next one will be on services. So that's also equally important subject, which will be moderated by the other co-chair of our board, Patrick, who just joined some time ago this session. So it's going to be mid-April. Invitations will be sent. So we look forward to your participation next time. Thank you very much, and see you next time.